Sarah, are we good to go?
All set, go ahead.
All right, great. Thank you. I know we have a few participants that are coming in at this point in time, but I'm going to go ahead and start the meeting. We have a lot to cover. Want to introduce myself. My name is Katie Service. I'm the airport manager. And although we are conducting this meeting via Zoom, we would have preferred to have you in person. Unfortunately, due to COVID-19, this is our new reality. So we are doing our best to make sure that you, as participants and members of the public in our community, have an opportunity to learn more about the airport master plan, to learn more about how we would like to proceed forward to meet demand at the airport, and then to answer any questions that you may have. So let me go ahead and start with some introductions. As I said, my name is Katie Service. I'm the airport manager. With me tonight, as part of our panel, is Matt Elia, the assistant airport manager. I also have Kim Supala. She's going to be the moderator for us tonight. She is with the Quotient Group. And then we have two members of our team from McFarland Johnson, Rick Lucas and Laura Canham, who will be providing some background and information in regards to our master. And of course, we have you, our attendees, who are joining us tonight. I'm going to hand this over to Kim. Kim is going to go over some housekeeping um, items and show you how you can participate and ask questions using the Zoom webinar feature that we have. So, Kim, go ahead.
Thanks, Katie. So some housekeeping tips for our presentation today. Currently and throughout the meeting, your microphone will be muted. This meeting is going to be recorded also. So we will be submitting questions in the Q&A box, which may be different in different locations based on the device that you're on. We will be showing you exactly where that is on laptop in the following slides. The questions will be answered at designated times throughout this presentation, and we're going to attempt to answer as many questions as possible, whether it will be in the Q&A section type or we will be answering them verbally. If your questions are not answered during this presentation, we will be updating the FAQs on the master plan website, and Katie will be showing us that in a few moments also. If you are on a phone or doing on television or don't have a way to type in the comment box, please send your comments to this email address, hyamasterplan@mjinc.com. Here's a screen capture of where the typical chat section is. It's the Q&A icon on the screen there. If you do not see the Q&A icon, you could scroll, you can touch your screen with your fingers or scroll over it with your mouse, and that icon may show up, and it would be in different sections depending on what device you're on. This is how it shows up when you're typing in. And please notice that there are two tabs on the top saying all questions or my questions. So you can toggle between those to see what you're looking for. Oh, and we can see the project team and participants also beside that on the participant list icon.
Thank you, Kim. So just wanted to show you how to get to our master plan website. The master plan website is featured on the town of Barnstable's page. We are a department of the town. So you can see there I've circled Cape Cod Gateway Airport. So if you do a drop down from the department list, click on Cape Cod Gateway Airport. Next, Laura. Our page will open for the airport, and at the very top of the page to the right of our logo is the airport master plan. You can click there, and that will provide you with all of the documents that have been developed as part of this master plan thus far. Any of The frequently asked questions, we have two that have been developed based on questions that we have received from the public using that email address that Kim just. And then we have any of the documents or videos based on previous meetings with our stakeholders and documents relating to the introduction, which we're going to give you a brief overview as part of this meeting. The introduction, forecast for future demand, and other items are also available on that website. So please take a look at it. Let me go over the agenda with you for tonight. We're going to give you a very brief overview of the master plan, a background, inventory of existing conditions, and then what we anticipate future demand will be at the airport. You have to remember that this is a 20-year master plan. So we look at various times within that master plan to identify what potential demand will be based on industry, what we see in the industry, facility requirements, and then we will be giving an overview of environmental elements that we'll be looking at as part of the master plan. If you see the dashed line that we have on the screen there is discussion break. A lot of this information is heavy. It's a lot of information to digest. So we will be taking different breaks after the environmental review, during airside alternatives, and then the preliminary recommendation for the airport master plan will be taking discussion. So if you do have questions during that time, please go to the Q&A section of the Zoom presentation to ask questions. And Kim will be monitoring that and she will provide us with some information. Some of the information she'll be able to present to you right away if she has that data for you. If not, we'll go to the verbal responses and we can answer some of your questions then. Then we'll be looking at terminal area alternatives, general aviation alternatives, and next steps. The bulk of the information will be spent during the environmental overview, alternatives, and preliminary recommendations. And with that, what I'd like to do is hand it over to Rick Lucas. Rick is going to get into the master plan background. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Katie. So as Katie alluded to, we would like to be there in person, and this meeting is meant to replace the workshop style meetings that you may be familiar with. We have the easels and boards and different stations. So we have here is just kind of an overview of the different topic areas of the master plan, and each of these items are on the YouTube channel that are covered in greater detail. So if there's a topic areas of interest, I encourage you to go to the YouTube channel and learn more about these different topic areas. So what is a master plan? A master plan is the official FA planning document, reflects the town of Barnstable's goals and the airport, the sponsor's goals for the airport. It depicts development for the next 20 years. Essentially, the FA is not going to allow you to accept any grant or participate in any funding projects unless you have a plan as to how you are going to spend the money and why you need it. So it's very much like a transportation plan or other broader community plans that are just that. They are a plan, and that anything that comes out of it still needs to go through the necessary environmental reviews and approvals before it can actually be implemented. So this meeting is for the plan itself, not for any particular project. What generated the need for the master plan update? The master plan update, the last one was done in about 2008, and the FAA really recommends that you update them about every 10 years because aviation is a very dynamic industry and is always changing. Next. All right, so the master plan goals, we wanted to keep in mind that there's the airport business plan, which was developed 2 years ago, and there's also the town of Barnstable goals which encompass the needs of the broader community, as well as the FA and MassDOT goals, which are more safety and standards oriented. We want to balance all of these together and let all of these different interests inform the master plan goals. That's what we looked at as far as this project goes, informing both town, state FA, as well as the airport business. The process. So we started this, which is the inventory forecast environmental, which talks about what do we have. Then we go into facility requirements, which is based on what we have and where we're going, what do we need? We have alternatives, which is what options do we have, and that's what we're going to focus on today. And the implementation plan, which is more of the financial and phasing, which means how do you pay for it, and what are the short-term priorities and what are the long-term priorities. And then there's the final report, the airport layout plan. So as you can see, when we did the process for the initial public feedback back in the fall, that was when we're trying to figure out what is it that we need after that baseline of information. And we've been receiving the public feedback throughout the course of the project. Both Laura and I here have been monitoring that HWA email address that was previously mentioned throughout the court, and we've read every comment that comes in. So we encourage your feedback. So as far as the schedule goes, the schedule would a little bit change because of the COVID-19 impacts, because we were planning to have these meetings in person. But as you can see, we're kind of nearing the conclusion of the project, and we're hoping to be finished up sometime in this spring. But the initial public materials were rolled out back in October, and that's when we had launched the YouTube channel with the videos, and been maintaining the email addresses, and postcards have been going out ever since. That's a quick overview of the master plan itself, and then our public decision plan, as we update it, as you mentioned, is we previously want to do the open house format where we come out and talk to you in person. We actually plan to have 2 of those at least throughout the course of the project, but because of COVID-19, we had to launch. We opted for the YouTube channel because that is fully public. You can share links with your neighbors, your friends, and you can watch it as many times as you want on your own schedule, as opposed to the traditional meetings we could not do in person. And of course, we are having a virtual public meeting today in addition. So now we're going to go into the inventory of existing conditions. And this is going to just kind of highlight, this is a high level overview of the facilities that are available at the airport. Thank you, Laura. So at the airport today, there are 2 similarly sized runways that are, one's 5,200 feet long, one is 5,400 feet long. They're similar in length, and they're supported by a network of taxiways and aprons that connect the runways. We'll get into some of the nuances of the runways and taxiway system shortly. As far as the landside tenants and businesses go, there are over 45 businesses and tenants on the airport, both aviation and non-aviation. So that's a lot of businesses and a lot of jobs, which is a great thing for the community. There are 3 ramps for parking aircraft. There are also 3 different airlines that serve the airport: JetBlue, Cape Air, and Southern Airways Express, all of which can take you to Boston, JFK, and as well as the islands. Fuel services, car rentals, avionics, maintenance. So this is a full service airport for a wide variety of aviation needs. And what does that translate into economic impact wise? Is there are over 1,700 jobs that are directly attributed to the airport, with a payroll of just under $74 million and a total economic output of over $150 million. As it relates to the forecast was something that was particularly tricky to do during the COVID times, and that's because the industry has been greatly evolving. But we focused on 3 different areas: operation, which is a takeoff or a landing, and we're seeing growth in itinerant traffic, stable island flying, and incremental JetBlue season growth. And this is still true with COVID. We've seen actually an uptick in some itinerant traffic because people who live in New York were actually spending the winter out of their second homes, and the second home environment is actually becoming a little bit more attractive than it previously was. But what that's doing is it's not going to make the summer season busier, but it has a potential to kind of balance some of that traffic throughout the rest of the year. So you may see more activity in the shoulder season and the winter time compared to everything being concentrated in the summer. JetBlue has also been trying to slowly grow their season to also match that shoulder season as well. So there's some incremental growth there. But overall, even with the growth that we're forecasting, the forecast remains over 50,000 operations below the previous highs that were seen in the 1990s, when you had a steady stream of inter-island flying going out of this airport. So operations are still expected to remain below what the airport did previously, again, in the early to mid-90s. We also measure based aircraft, and what we're seeing there is growth in small business jets and turbine aircraft, with a consolidation in the light general aviation segment into things like flying clubs. And then passenger enplanements, that is the measure of one person getting on an airplane. There's no baseline growth because we believe the island market is basically stagnant. So the people that have shifted to the ferry are going to stay until there's some kind of market shift. So if there was like electric aircraft that changes the cost paradigm, then you may see an uptick. But baseline, I think the island market, everyone has since settled into whichever how they're going to access the island. But we'll get into it on the next slide. Is there is a large Cape-based market capable of supporting year-round air service. So we did look at some forecast scenarios that are options to make sure we can truly plan for the future need of the airport. And some of the forecast scenarios include a summer seasonal carrier, a new year-round carrier, things like ultra low-cost carriers, and then of course a market interruption. I mean, no matter how good you are at forecasting, I don't think anyone could have predicted the impact of COVID. But there's always traditionally been some sort of market interruption that will have a short-term effect on demand. We saw that with 9/11, the Great Recession, airline bankruptcies. All of these different employment levels also are below previous highs. However, it's important to note that with this type of air carrier, even though the employments are lower, it's a different type of employment because these people would be going into the national airspace system and accessing other flights to be able to conduct businesses to and from Hyannis throughout the world, as opposed to just going back and forth to the island. Okay. So now going into facility requirements. So facility requirements, these are some of the key issues that we wanted to discuss, which include no direct roadway access. We'll get into that later on. That's going to be a separate study. We want to validate the previously proposed runway extension from the previous master plan, obstruction removal, aeronautical development, meeting FAA standards, and as well as maximizing non-aviation revenue at the airport. So the previous master plan from 2008 also identified a runway extension. It showed a 926-foot runway extension to the northwest, closest to Independence Drive. You can see also on that master plan that the terminal was then proposed. So you can see that that was one of the action items that was developed from the previous master plan. But the runway extension is not a new concept, and we want to look at the previous analysis to see what that was based on and is it still needed. So again, a summary of facility requirements we'll get into is the runway length recommended between 6,000 and 6,400 feet. FAA design standard, that's more the technical nitty gritty on the taxiways. We'll get into that shortly as well. And there's tenant facility improvements. So this is a lot of demand-based facilities. So hangars and aprons, and really more on an as-needed basis. But where do we put that, and where does it make the most sense? And looking at snow removal, firefighting, maintenance equipment, and so on, and then green development for the airport as well. So as it relates to runway length, and we know this is the most important issue, so that we actually took some extra time and we looked at the FAA has a runway length advisory circular, 150/53/25. And the way this FAA guidance is written is that there are two ways to do the analysis. They want you to look at either general aviation fleet between 12,500 pounds to 60,000 pounds, or they want you to use individual aircraft over 60,000 pounds. Because this is such an important issue, we actually did it every single way possible using the FAA guidance. So we looked at the general aviation fleet, and then we used it for each of the aircraft that use the airport that are over 60,000 pounds, which includes the Embraer 190 by JetBlue, its replacement, the A220, the Gulfstream 4, the Gulfstream 5, the Global Express, and the Global 5000. You can see the results of each of those analyses here, but we actually did it for each individual type of aircraft. And there are some more talking points with this, is as the airport becomes more of a year-round airport, you have to consider the winter operation when you have wet and slippery runways, when operators are required to add 15% to their requirements. So if this is going to become more of a year-round community where people are living here on the Cape and accessing their businesses in other parts, we do need to consider that. But it is important to note that both runways in Hyannis are the shortest runways used by commercial jets in the entire Northeast. So in addition to the forecast scenarios we talked about, again, just to make sure that we are positioned for the future, we looked at some of those other options, and you can see the runway length requirements match the exact same for the similar range that we discuss using the FAA methodology, meaning that even the future what if scenarios are consistent with the existing. Then from a qualitative perspective, the airlines are retiring, consolidating their fleet. So just because the JetBlue E190 works really well for short runways, they are the only operator of that particular aircraft in the United States. And commercial service, we did get passenger booking data, and we found that there are over 200,000 annual trips booked by Cape Cod residents. That does not include inbound visitors. So what that translates to is over 200 people per day are traveling off Cape for their air transportation needs. That is vehicle traffic, that is time, that's a lot of time if you're doing rush hour with Boston, that's emissions, and that 200,000 number doubles when you account for the inbound tourism market. But we wanted to focus on just the Cape-based demand, Cape residents and the Cape users as far as the justification for this. And again, as mentioned before, is that the post-COVID work environment has been making the Cape more attractive to year-round residents as second homes are becoming more the first home. And also not to be ignored is the upcoming the bridge replacement plan, providing that critical air link could become more of an asset during that project. So then as it relates to taxiways, looking at the FAA standards, the taxiways we have to take a look at, they want us to focus on the known as geometry, which is the intersections at which taxiways interface with runways, and if there's any crossings in high energy areas, the middle portion of the runway. So we do have to kind of reconfigure some taxiways here. None of these projects would actually add new capacity to the airport. All they would do is enhance safety and bring the intersections in alignment with the FAA standard. That's fairly common. You have older airfields like this that have been around for 50 plus years, and you have to kind of, FAA wants to make sure that all the taxiway intersections are at 90 degrees or 45 degrees. There's no unexpected turns and movement. So now I'm turning to Katie for the environmental overview.
Thank you, Rick. Real quick, actually, Laura, can you go back to that previous screen? Just a little bit of housekeeping. So as you might have noticed for those who are watching the presentation, every time we come to a different subject matter, we kind of highlight where we are. So Rick went through the background, the inventory, the forecast of demand, facility requirements, and now we're at the environmental review. I just wanted to bring that to your attention as you're watching. Okay, next slide, Laura. So in terms of the environmental review, this portion of the master plan is truly more of an overview of what are the elements that we have on the airport or surrounding the airport that we need to be conscious of and that we need to be aware of so that when we start looking at that forecast for future need and start looking at facility needs, we're taking into account those natural resources that we need to protect. So, such as the wetlands and aquatic resources, you can see here on this graphic, which is also available if you go to our website. The environmental chapter has been uploaded. It was put up a couple of months ago. It has detailed information about what are those natural resources, those resources that we need to protect for. So the graphic you see here, the red outline is the airport property boundaries. And then just north of the airport, we have a lot of freshwater ponds, Gate, Lewis, Mary Dunn, Lamson Pond. And then also in the northeast corner of the airport, we also have vernal pools and isolated vegetated. So we're keeping account of what we have on the airfield, surrounding the airfield, so that we know that when we start looking at development, we're taking this into our analysis and our next slide. And the reason why I tell you this is because the airport has taken many steps to be environmental steward. We have a fairly robust program in regards to our stormwater management at the airport. So we have a number of bioretention basins that collect stormwater and remove suspended solids. We have stormwater treatment facilities that go through a pre-treatment before any of the stormwater exits out the ponds that I just spoke of. We do not use pesticides anywhere on the airport property. We do not use de-icing or chemicals during snow removal at the airport on the runways, taxiways, or aprons. We're very conscious of the water resource protection that we have at the airport, the aquifer that we're trying to protect, and we've taken many, many steps to make sure that we're achieving those goals. In addition to that, we do have a Fly Neighborly program that we put in place back in 2000 to respond to concerns that we had from citizens that live surrounding the airport. We continue to this day to work with our tenants on the airfield so that we can balance the operational plan for the airport as well as a reduction of aircraft noise when appropriate, so that we can be good neighbors, and we will continue to do that. Um, we are also looking at any way that we can reduce our energy use on the airport. So we have uh, 2 solar fields on the airport, about 20 acres in total that they cover. They offset more than 5,000 metric tons of CO2 emissions annually. We have 8 electric vehicle charging stations on the airfield. We implemented more digital footprint for our off processes so that we're basically not wasting paper. We avoid any further discharge of PFOS, which is a chemical found in firefighting foams. Our firefighting foam is the approved foam by the Federal Aviation Administration. There's no other approved source, but we've modified our usage since 2016 and collect that system and discharge PFOS through an internal system. Next slide. So Rick is going to go through a summary, just real quick, of existing conditions where we are. And again, we just put the Town of Barnstable website up there for you, the master plan locations, so that if you want to delve a little bit more into the environmental section, if you want more information, what Rick has just provided, you can download all of those documents, previous videos that were recorded right there on our website. So Rick, go ahead.
You there, Rick?
Sorry, I was muted. That was the Zoom problem. Anyways, the summary of existing conditions is the inventory forecast and environmental that we just described, as well as the facility requirements. So to understand that was a lot of information to digest. We want to take a brief discussion break and go over some of the questions that we've received so far. So I believe the first question here is looking at, says, if we know yet over the next 20 years, what are the projected needs for the earliest time of day departures and the latest time of day arrivals for Airbus 320, Boeing 737, or equivalent size? To answer that question, for a market like Hyannis, when you have lower volumes of air service, it would likely be very similar to how it exists today, where it's a JetBlue, which is known as a turn, and that is the aircraft will basically come in and then depart back out. And that would be a similar aircraft, slightly smaller than that. We would anticipate that service pattern to probably continue. If there was a year-round airline, you may have one flight that departs in the morning and another flight that departs in like the evening or mid-afternoon. But that's the type of levels that we're talking about. So I wouldn't anticipate that you would see more than one flight in a morning departure or a night arrival under any of the forecast scenarios that we discussed.
Okay. Thank you, Rick. And I could take the next question. So we had a question regarding landscaping and tree clearing that we did off the approach end of Independence Drive. The question is, what what is your landscape plan for the areas that were cleared along Independence Drive, Kids Hill Road? So for that particular project, that is to respond to approaches that we needed to clear for existing trees that had grown up in the existing approach for runway 15. This is the approach off of Independence Drive. We had a plan in place for the tree removal and shrub removal and a replanting plan. because of the drought, not all of our plants have returned to what I would call a robust nature that we wanted to see. So the replanting plan was involved lower shrubs and vegetation so that it wouldn't cause uh, an impact to the approach going forward in the future. But like I said, the drought caused some of those plants to die off. So this April, you will see our crew out there prepping the site again to reseed that area, replant that area with the low shrubs that did not survive through the winter and because of the drought. Hopefully that answers your question.
All right, I'm going to answer one of the questions here. It says, if all flights are projected to decline at the airport and the airport is operating at deficit, then why do we need to expand? The forecast of operations is actually going to slightly increase, but it's still well below previous highs. And what we're seeing is that it's a shift of operation. So flights that used to be either recreational in nature, so more like flight training, for example. Flight training is you do a lot of takeoffs and landings in a short period of time. That type of activity has been slightly declining or is being shifted to other airports because the operations are a little bit busier. But what you anticipate to replace it is slightly more corporate activity or some of those commercial forecast types. So again, all takeoffs and landings still count as an operation. And in terms of if you had 10 touch and goes, that's 20 operations. Whereas if you had 2 commercial operations that take a business traveler to go do work in Washington, D.C., that's actually 18 less operations at the airport. However, one could argue that the business travelers and having commercial service serving the business needs of the Cape would be well served by this airport.
Thank you, Rick. I have one follow-up question regarding the plantings. To respond to your question, it was plant what will be planted. We are replanting that area with shrubs, low-growing shrubs, as well as grasses that are native to Cape Cod. So that's what that area will be replanted. There was one more question regarding, again, how early and how late will a large aircraft be anticipated for takeoff or arrival? At this point in time, we really can't answer that question because we do not know what airline partners we will have in the future and what their schedules will be at this point in time. So unfortunately I can't answer how late or how early those flights will be operating. I think Rick tried to get to the root of the question, which is it could be something that's somewhat similar to what JetBlue is doing now. But again, we will not know the answer to that question until we work with some more airline partners that really decide to operate here at the airport. Okay. Kim, do we have any more questions that came in? Do we want to try to answer one more before we move on?
I'm just looking through these.
There's a question regarding the extension of the runway and lower approaches. We'll get into that when we get to alternatives, because one of the elements is the landing threshold being relatively unchanged compared to the takeoff threshold. So we'll get into that in a little bit.
There is one more question about air pollutants and will they be part of the study? And the answer is yes, they are not part of the master plan study, but there is a follow-up study, which is an environmental assessment that follows any airport master plan. And during that environmental assessment, air pollutants will be studied. Okay.
Let's go into some more, and then I think some more questions may be answered as we move forward as well.
That sounds good, Rick.
We have another discussion break after alternatives as well, and also at the end.
Okay, Rick, go ahead.
All right, so we're going to go into the airside alternatives. And the alternative development, again, we wanted to consider the 3 different sets of goals we previously talked about. We know that community and noise are sensitive issues for this airport. We're well aware of the physical constraints between the road, rail line, roads on all runway ends, actually. We're also aware of the environmental considerations through the PFAS and everything that Katie mentioned previously. So all of these things are informing the development of our alternatives. In addition to that, it's the cost and funding of everything. So we developed a detailed screening criteria for our alternative. So the screening criteria, there's two of these that are the master plan focus. The master plan is the goal of a master plan, or with the FA, is really to focus on the airport facility needs and the use. The environmental assessment, which is a separate study, considers the broader range of impacts both on and off airport. The EA has the ability to go much further off airport in scope of work than a master plan does. But we know that the master plan does not operate in a vacuum. So we wanted to consider the environmental impacts and broader community impacts as part of our screening criteria to make sure that some of our recommendations would at least make sense, or could at least identify what those key issues may be. So the level 1 screening criteria looks at the immediate vicinity and community constraints and infrastructure constraints, such as the rail line and Yarmouth Road. Level 2 is looking at meeting the facility requirements that we previously discussed. How do we meet the identified facility needs? And then level 3 screening is the environmental impact. Level 4 is the broader community impact, and level 5 is cost. But again, the environmental assessment is going to their focus is going to be in the environmental and community impact. But we will talk about and identify what those key issues will be to inform the master plan alternative. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura, who's going to walk us through this screening criteria process.
Thank you, Rick. Yeah, so the first level of screening, that immediate vicinity, community, and infrastructure. So essentially identifying, you can see here, we highlighted some of the roads, railroad lines in that purple color to identify that surrounding the airport, you see a lot of infrastructure. Anytime that anything infrastructure be moved, it would immediately impact areas. Green are shown throughout there, and then additional ones like Barnstable Village and Hyannis Park that are beyond the immediate vicinity of what here. So wanted to make sure we considered that. So what level 1 does is essentially take the airport, look at what's constrained, right? What are we considering for alternative? Which ones are therefore eliminated that don't pass the level 1? So we looked at 11 different alternatives around the airport and identified that any runway extension to the runway 24, the runway extension to runway 6s, any runway extension that's conducted on the 15 or 33 end would be limited so that the runway safety is fully on airport property. Nothing goes beyond roads, nothing moves those roads, we are in those. Any realignment of existing runways is not feasible, and any reduction in length of existing also. So anything that related to those items does not pass level 1 screening, so that we know that anything in level 2 stays on airport property, does not impact of immediate impact limits of the infrastructure. Level 2, which is the meets requirements and FAA standards. The first thing we always look at is the no build alternative to compare our build alternatives. Now, it should be noted that in this case, the no build alternative does not the future facility needs of the airport. So what we did then is we identified 3 alternatives to meet the runway length facility requirements. The first one you see at the very top, meet all facility requirements. Some of the cons of that alternative are that there are a lot of obstructions that would need to be taken care of, as well as some incompatible land. So based on that, then we looked at, okay, how can we reduce the compatibility down a little bit? So then the second alternative that we looked at, move the landing threshold along Independence Drive further in towards. This helps minimize obstruction, right? Enhances land use compatibility, but doesn't quite meet the facility requirement. So then what we looked at is how do we find a balance? This reduces the runway length even more, this third alternative. It meets most facility requirements, and it enhances land use compatibility, minimize. So based on those 4 runway length alternatives, we had evaluation criteria for meet the facility requirements, meet FAA standards, and is it constructible? And only that last alternative meets most requirements, the shortest runway length alternative that we looked at, so that passed the level. All the other 3 were eliminated. Then we looked at not just runway, but the taxiway system. And we had many preliminary alternatives that we took a look at. Ultimately, 10 taxiway alternatives and enhancements came forward and were evaluated. We evaluated meeting facility requirements, meeting FAA standards, and if they are constructible. And based on that, 8 passed the level 3. When we put all these 8 together, since they touched upon different portions of the airport, we ended up getting 2 combined alternatives forward to the level 3. So that was a lot, and I went pretty fast, but I wanted to see if at this point in time we had any other questions you wanted.
And answer a few more questions that we received so far. There was one question on the size of planes, and we had it on the slide. I just did not fully get to it. The critical design aircraft is actually not changing from existing. So the JetBlue E190 is the largest airplane that uses the airport regularly. It shares the same design characteristics as some of the larger corporate aviation aircraft that also use the airport, such as the Gulfstream and the Global Express. JetBlue is replacing the Embraer 190 with a slightly larger Airbus 220. That aircraft is a little bit larger, but it's also quieter, but it shares the same design criteria, so it won't result in any additional infrastructure needs compared to the E190. So that is probably the largest aircraft that could be expected would be the JetBlue aircraft, but the corporate aviation aircraft that are similar in size would also still use the airport regularly, but nothing larger than that.
And Rick, let me try to answer one question. We've had a couple of questions regarding to the species of plants that are being used to repopulate the area where the tree clearing occurred. So we had posted that information several times. We started the project and we gave an overview of those species, just a graphic overview of what would be planted. We can certainly put that that previous press release back on our website. We'll go ahead. Just scrolling through some more of these questions here. There are some questions regarding the property and how can we extend a runway and what additional land might be needed to increase runway length. We will be getting into that in the next couple of slides, but to answer your question really briefly and quickly, the airport is proposing runway extension all within existing airport property boundaries. So we'll show you some graphics on that as well. And I'm just scrolling through the questions again. We have one question that isn't regards to the runway, but it is in regards to the Kmart shopping plaza plans for the retail property. Just to answer that question real briefly, WS Development, who leased the property from the airport, is working on a plan. Obviously, COVID-19 has put a little bit of a stall on their progression forward with plans for that future development. But once they have a plan in place and once they have folks that are interested in the parcel and in the shopping plaza and opening up at that location, they will be starting their own public meetings at that. But that's a few years off. Okay, Rick, should we go ahead and continue on and then we can answer some more of these questions in a few moments?
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
So moving forward, so this first step that we went through now are level, excuse me, level 1 and level 2 screening, which were more of the master focus items. So now we're going to move into the second step, more of environmental assessment. So level 3 screening is the environmental impact. Level 4 is the broader community impact. Level 5. What we'll do there is take the 2 combined alternatives that I mentioned, kind of give a broad overview of on items that identify that further inform the case. So the environmental impact, something that Katie already went over, just high level identifying environmental perform the NEPA. So as part of those, for the environmental impact, we look at wetlands, vernal pools, habitat of rare species, wildlife impact, and we identify that the two combined alternatives have the same or similar environmental impact. There are no pool, no habitat, rare species, no wildlife impact based on the identified that we have found. Both do have additional pavement, but the pavement amount is similar in both alternatives, and most of the airport will still be unpaved today. The 639 acres is mostly open space, and there is an identified some wetland pond impact that would require local support. But for both the alternatives, it's similar manner. The second level 4 screening, so both of those alternatives move to level 4. Level 4 is the broader community impact. There's increased travel flexibility and convenience, balanced impact to surrounding communities, no change for aircraft landing on runway 33, and enhanced airport control all in ferry base. So again, the environmental and broader community impact will be reviewed in detail in the following National Environmental Policy Act study, and both combined alternatives pass. So the last screening is level 5, which is the cost. We look at the initial investment cost as well as maintenance and operation costs. Now, it should be noted that for FAA eligible projects, the cost consideration, but full master plan capital improvement plan will consider only FAA, Mass DOT Aeronautics, and airport funds. So no town or taxpayer money is proposed for airport improvement. So when we compare the two remaining combined alternatives, only one passed the level 5, and ended up result in the preliminary airside recommendation for the airport. Now this meets FAA standards, strikes the balance between community impacts and operational needs, and it has minimal community impact by balanced airfield, and as well as after that it advanced to the NEPA process. So what we looked at, at the beginning, we tried to find a plan that kind of found a balance between a community environmental impact, operational safety and flexibility, community and regional benefits with looking at cost side. We think that this plan should be the one that's reviewed for going further in the NEPA. All right, I know there were a lot of other questions, so we'll take a short break and get back to a couple more
There
questions.
are 2 questions about Part 150.
For the with the Part 150 question, we do cover noise briefly later on, but I did want to address that was referring to the stages of aircraft, and we'll get into noise again shortly. But the FAA is actually our partner and friend in some of these the older aircraft. I see there's another comment regarding aircraft in the 1990s as well. But the FAA has been routinely and incrementally outlawing larger aircraft. So the question there referred to stages 1 through 5, and currently, actually, previously stages 2, 3, and 4 were minimum to operate in the U.S. Stage 1 was banned, and as of December of 2015, stage 2 is also banned. So we can anticipate as we go forward that we're going to see an incrementally upgrade as these aircraft get quieter. Some of the noisiest aircraft and loudest offenders, quite honestly, are coming out of the aircraft network. So we do the future noise contours. When we replace it with the quieter, more efficient aircraft, it is possible the noise contours may be the same or shrink. We've only done the existing contours we'll get to shortly, but the FAA is incrementally banning the larger aircraft as in a slow way, where 10, 20 years from now, the aircraft, they may be larger, but they will not be louder.
Okay, I'm just scrolling through some of the other questions real quickly here.
Yeah, so bear with us. We do scroll through looking for questions as we answer them. And then I know one of the questions here is the airlines, do the airlines dictate the schedules or not? The airlines, they has to work with a variety of items in terms of how they schedule the aircraft. That you have true legalities and different times in there. But in terms of the times of schedules, to get back to that question, it seems to keep coming up. If you look at other airports, typically there'll be a morning flight sometime between 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning. That flight would come in around 10 o'clock at night, but they would want to. But again, at smaller airports, you typically see the midday or evening turn. And when we get into the terminal alternatives, you'll see that we're not building a terminal that's going to accommodate droves and droves of flights as well. The terminal alternative is not to spoil it, but we're using the existing building, which has limitations because we believe it's right sized for the market.
Okay. Rick, why don't we get into a little bit more of the presentation, and we'll come back for questions.
Sounds good. Since I just teased it up anyways, get into the terminal area alternatives. So looking at the requirements, we looked at the existing provision. We looked at 150 passengers, which is similar to a JetBlue A220 and a Cape Air flight or two going out around the same time. And then we looked at 200 passengers, which would be the equivalent of having two different air carrier flights around the same time, because there are two gates out of the secure hold room. But that's as far as we looked in terms of the passenger terminal, and that's consistent with the facility, the forecast scenarios that we previously discussed. But in terms of the priority areas, it's baggage claim, because there is no baggage claim device. It's simply just a chute right now. So with larger aircraft, more of a traditional carousel would be recommended. The hold room is limited in size for 100 passengers. So if you have a slightly larger aircraft, you may need a slightly larger hold room, and also the security checkpoint. Then outbound baggage screening, having the X-ray machine equipment that's used for screening bags. Those are relatively large, so there is some additional back of the house space that's needed to accommodate some of these larger X-ray baggage screening that TSA is required. But depending how you use the space, it could be anywhere between 5,000 and 25,000 square feet. But and you'll see in the next slide, what we talk about is, again, these priority areas of how we can really make it work just by reworking existing space and not having to expand the terminal, but we can get the building to accommodate the change in JetBlue aircraft, as well as even the forecast scenarios that we discussed. And the next slide talks about the recommended plan, and that would be simply reworking some existing space. So looking at the conference room that's adjacent to baggage claim, the conference room does not need to be next to baggage claim. They could use a conference room that is upstairs. The concession area could be converted into secure hold room. And so that way we can use the existing terminal building and use the existing two gates to accommodate the forecast demand. So again, going back to that airline question, that if there's only two gates, there's no way you could have more than two flights depart in the morning. So that way we're honest in terms of the terminal plan, is that the terminal plan is consistent with our forecast scenarios. So we're not building a terminal that's going to accommodate, again, droves and droves of different air carrier flights. As it relates to landside general aviation and support facilities, this is essentially everything else on the airport. So looking at airport access, it's important to note that airport funds cannot be used to fund any roads that are off airport property. So we understand that traffic is definitely a key issue here, and this is going to be further evaluated in the environmental assessment, where we are allowed to look a little bit further off airport in terms of many of the access issues that face this airport all stem from a variety of different directions. So we recommend a standalone study to look at both wayfinding and coordination, how best to coordinate with Mass DOT, as well as towns around the airport, on how best to improve traffic and access to the airport. General aviation development areas, these are the areas which we have a additional hangar and or aircraft apron. So these again are demand based in terms of where you would see both of these areas are adjacent to existing apron and hangar areas. There's not a new development area that isn't already serving general aviation directly adjacent to it. And then we also, of course, looking for green opportunities. We have a really unique situation here at this airport with the existing solar array, in addition to Cape Air being the launch customer for electric aircraft. And so that means that this airport really is on the forefront of green technology, and we want to find ways to capitalize on that and really embrace this green initiative of Cape Air is going to have electric aircraft. Are there opportunities for additional electric aircraft to use the airport? Because that's going to mean better air quality. It could mean reduced noise as well if these aircraft are quieter. So we are hoping to we did identify 2 areas adjacent to the terminal that, so it's addition next to the terminal ramp that allows for electric aircrafts that can be used by both commercial as well as general aviation users for electric aircraft as well. And the technology is still evolving, but finding ways to have electric aircraft charging stations, and so we can really be on the cutting edge because of our partners here in this project. So with that, we get to the preliminary recommended alternative for the ALP. This includes the airside alternatives that Laura walked through, married with the general aviation development areas that we've just previously discussed. But this is what the recommended plan for the ALP looks like. And so now the next slide is going to show the noise.
Rick, before you go to that, I'm sorry, excuse me. Before you go to that, I just want to sit here for a second with this preliminary recommended alternative for the ALP, because we do have a lot of questions that have come in that I want to be able to answer some of the questions here. One of the questions was, what is the category of landing system that will be upgraded as part of the master plan? So Rick, if you can go ahead and answer that in regard to our facilities, what is recommended as part of that?
So for the landing system, both runways 15 and runway 24 have an instrument landing system, and that is expected to be unchanged. The minimums for runway 15 is similar to that of an ILS, so I believe it's half mile, 200 feet, and the runway 24 minimums are slightly higher than that. I do not anticipate any changes or improvements to any of the minimums from their existing levels at the airport. So the existing poor visibility condition landing systems would be the same as they are today.
Thank you, Rick. We do have some questions. There are quite a few that came in and revolve around the runway expansion, particularly what that impact could be on Hyannis Park in West Yarmouth, as well as any expansion that could potentially impact Barnstable Village. So, Rick, I'd like to discuss here that balanced approach, and I know that when we went through the screening criteria for runway 1533, we talked about how that screening criteria was used to help us meet requirements or standards, or if we were looking at that screening criteria based on environmental impact or the broader community impact. Can we talk a little bit about those broader community impact and how we modified our preliminary recommended approach for this runway from how we modified it from the original 2008 proposed proposed runway extension in the 2008 master plan? Why we're looking at a little bit more of a balanced approach here that ultimately will, answer some of the questions that the folks in West Yarmouth have, as well as the folks in Barnstable Village.
Yeah. So the previous master plan, the 926-foot extension that was shown was entirely a displaced threshold, meaning that it kept the landing threshold for landing from the northwest in the same exact place, and it was only used for takeoff on runway 15. And that also means that to achieve the full landing length of the extension, it was only beneficial when landing on runway 33, which is approaching over Hyannis Park and Yarmouth. So the additional length of the previous extension would only be achieved by landing over Yarmouth and Hyannis Park. So that was one of the detriments to the previous plan, is that it actually tended to focus the operations over Yarmouth and Hyannis Park. Whereas our plan doesn't show as much of a displaced threshold. It's somewhat displaced, but not fully displaced. But there's also an extension a little bit by leaving the landing threshold in the place to the southeast. We're able to get better utilization, better runway, known as declared distances, in both directions that don't result in one area being more artificially, I don't even for penalized, but essentially have the impacts concentrated over one area because the previous plan had just a displaced threshold. Again, you only actually receive that landing benefit over Yarmouth, whereas this plan is much more balanced between both ends. And so right now, runway 624 is the longer runway. And so if we extend this runway a little bit longer, it will, again, we'll be able to balance the airfield and balance the operations over each of the 4 runway ends. And what that does is the noise is no longer concentrated over one particular neighborhood. So yes, there's still planes flying over each neighborhood probably every day. Both runways are used often, but it's not concentrated. So from a noise perspective, it's not as much of a steady stream of aircraft when you have equal runways, or when you have an extension on both ends as opposed to just one end.
Thank you, Rick. We also had another question about what does this mean for besides the runway? What does it mean for taxiway infrastructure and other infrastructure that leads to the runway environment to be able to access those new runway ends? And that's a great question. Yes, we do need to look at our taxiway system. The graphic that you have on your screen, you can see in that bright green color, look at the modifications to the taxiway system. But not only are we looking at modifications to meet new runway ends, the vast majority of the taxiways that we're making recommendations for modification here are solely to meet federal aviation regulations. As you can imagine, the FAA has a number of airports with commercial air traffic similar to ours. Um, as they proceed with new standards, they want all airports to be upgraded or update their facilities to meet those standards. And those new standards are based on recommended safety parameters that the FAA would like to put in at different airports and or other studies that have been done at other facilities. So the vast majority of modifications that you see here on this plan taxiway system really is to respond to that FAA safety criteria and the standards that they need us to meet. However, there are some taxiways that you can see, especially the runway at the approach end of 15, where we're showing that extension, or at the extension shown on 33, where we have the actual taxiway system. Thank you. The taxiway system that is going to the end of that runway, which is what the FAA typically like to see when you're doing any type of extension, to make sure that the pilot can get to the extreme ends of that runway as well. So I hope that answers your questions. There are a few questions in regard to larger aircraft utilizing 33 and 15. Rick, can you go back to the slide where it talks about really the existing aircraft that are utilizing this facility? And we're not necessarily looking for larger aircraft to come in. We're looking to accommodate some of the existing aircraft that are utilizing the facility. So it might be your table, Rick, the runway length table that shows some of our existing commercial and general aviation. Can you go over that a little bit more, Rick? Because we seem to have a lot of questions there.
Yeah, so the design aircraft, and actually go back one more slide and then I'll jump to this one. I'll cover these 2 slides in greater detail. What you see here is we call it the C3 family of aircraft. When we design airport facilities, everything is a function of the aircraft's approach speed and also the wingspan. So the Gulfstream 4, which is, or 5, or whichever high-end business jet that is on the bottom, maybe it's a 5 or a 6, all of those share the same, that is on the smaller end of the C3 family, whereas the JetBlue E190, as well as the Airbus 320, is on the larger end of that. So all of these aircraft in that same general grouping And these are the over 60,000 pounds that we did an individual analysis for the runway length. And the JetBlue E190, for example, is being replaced by the Airbus 220. But these aircraft are similar in size to the high-end business jets that are already using the airport. When we actually added up each of the aircraft that are over 60,000 pounds, to do this analysis, we had to pull a report of how many aircraft of these that use the airport. Uh, Over the past 10 years, there were 7,000 total operations of aircraft greater than 60,000 pounds that use this airport. And those are pretty much entirely the Embraer 190, the G4, G5, Global Express, and Global 5000. A220 doesn't use the airport yet because JetBlue has not switched to that aircraft yet. But these aircraft are using the airport today. And so if you go to the next slide regarding the different runway length types, you see the Gulfstream, the Global, and it's important to note also that some of the commercial operators that we're talking about, so the CRJ 700, that is actually very similar. It's a commercial version, essentially, of the Global Express. So they're both made by Bombardier. The Embraer 175, which is a popular aircraft with regional fleets, while the Embraer 190 is not popular airlines besides JetBlue, the Embraer 175, which is a shrink of that, is actually very popular with the regional airlines. So American, United, Delta, all of them fly the Embraer 175. So if there were to be commercial operators, such as the forecast scenarios of other operators or other airlines, it would be something the equivalent of American or Delta with 1 or 2 daily flights on these regional aircraft of the same size as the larger business jet aircraft that are already using the airport.
Thank you, Rick. Rick, we do have a couple of questions from the community regarding the usage of 1533 versus the usage of runway 624 if 1533 were to be extended. So, kind of questions about the ratio, comparing the activity that we might see on that runway versus activity on runway 624. Can you answer that? We've had several questions come up about that.
We've taken a close look at that for when we do the future noise contour. And that is a good question because I think that's anticipated that being one of the areas of concern. Uh, there are a couple different factors that play into it. So wind conditions play into it, as well as instrument conditions. And so on the good weather days, runway 624 is favored from a wind perspective. On instrument condition days, runway 15 has the best landing system. So on poor weather days, runway 15 is favored. So what's good about that is that means that aircraft such as the Embraer 175 or regional aircraft and business aircraft that can still use the airport will still use 624 when the weather is good on days they would normally have used it otherwise. What we would anticipate would be probably about a 10% shift. So that would be at least on the higher end aircraft, it would be between 2 and 10 operations per day that would shift to runway 1533 simply out of necessity because they are going to a further destination or they're more the commercial operators, they would need that additional length. So there would be a slight shift, but not a huge shift, simply because many of the users that are already using the airport today would still use runway 624 during favorable wind conditions, which is more predominant for 624 than it is 1533.
Thank you, Rick. Rick, we also have some questions in regards to flight paths. There were a couple of different ones that came in. So bear with me for a second because I just want to make sure I have all of them. In general, one of the questions is, can the flight path, can the flight path be changed to avoid going over residential areas? Bear with me because I'm just going to scroll down. I know we have a couple of other ones. There was a question about, can the flight path be changed to avoid going over historic areas in the town as well. So I'll attempt to answer one of the first ones in regards to flying over residential areas. Can flight plans avoid that? And really, the answer is no, unfortunately, because the airport itself, you can see from the graphic that we have up on the screen right now, is we are surrounded by a very diverse community. We have industrial, commercial, and residential that surround the airport. If I were to pull up a plan of the airport from the 1970s and the 1950s, you can see the progression of development that has occurred in this region, which is great for the economy. It's great for the region. This is the economic core for the Cape and Islands. So there's a lot of commercial and um, um, economic activity that occurs in this area of Barnstable. So from the direction that the runways are presently in, there really is very little that can be done to actually avoid residential areas because we are surrounded by both residential and commercial. So, there are a lot of things that we do take into account when it comes to noise flying over residential areas, which is our fly friendly, fly quiet program that we do have in place. Um, People have called our noise hotline. You can leave a message, you can track the flight, and we have worked with our tenants on the airfield, especially if there's some of those early morning flights or late evening flights, working with our tenants to do the best that we can in terms of flight operations, making sure that those pilots are aware of our program, that they're aware of the flight track that we try to have them stay on when they're departing or arriving in this area. So we do our best in terms of working with our community, our aviation community, and with the community that surrounds us to try to have a win-win for both communities. Hopefully that will answer your question.
And Katie, just to want to jump on that, is had this question before at other airports. When you have published approach procedures that have you lined up with the runway, that when you have, again, for the poor visibility or instrument operations, these procedures will line you up with the runway well in advance for safety purposes. They don't want you coming in at an angle, having to make a sharper turn very close to the runway environment. These procedures do line you up with the different runway ends. So the best solution for noise is to have as similarly capable runways and similarly capable approaches. So the fact that both runway 15 and runway 24 have an instrument landing system is a good thing, because otherwise all of the aircraft would be using one or the other, or at least when you have when winds permit, you have an instrument landing system to both runways.
Thank you, Rick. Rick, we do have a lot of questions in regard to Part 150 study. We have questions in regard to noise proofing homes. So let's move on to the slide where we do have the preliminary noise content.
Okay. So this here shown is the preliminary noise contour, which is based on existing levels or 2019 levels for the airport. This is a day-night average that was developed using the FAA's Aviation Environmental Design Tool. This is the industry standard for measuring airport noise. The day-night average level allows us to accommodate for nighttime operations. So any operation that occurs between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. is factored up by a tenfold multiplier to truly account for the nighttime and also early morning operation. The FAA threshold for noise is 65 decibels. So what you see shown on the map here is the 55 is in blue, the 60 is in green, the 65 is in yellow, and the 70 is in red. So what this tells us is that it does identify that the 55 decibel noise level does go off airport. However, the threshold of significance for the FAA for things like soundproofing is 65, which is the area shown in yellow. So as you can see over here, we are showing, I think the runway 624 does actually have a slightly higher noise contour because 624 is used more then runway 1533, meaning that if there was an extension and a shift to runway 1533, as we discussed previously, that it is possible that the contour for runway 624 may actually shrink.
Thank you, Rick. There are some other questions. I'm just going through these.
Yeah,
Um,
I was just going to say thank you very much for your patience, everybody. We have a lot of questions, so even though you may think that we missed your question, you don't need to resend it. We are getting so many questions that we're really best. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you, Laura, and I appreciate that. There is a question about contact. There are actually 3 questions that came in about contact for the FAA, so that the community can reach out to them regarding the plan. So I don't have that phone number or that email in front of me right now, but I promise you that we'll get that and we will post it as soon as possible onto our website that you can have a contact for the planner at the FAA that you can reach out to for any additional questions that you may have. I would also, some of your questions that you do have are available on our website in some of the documents that we have already posted. So I would suggest that you take a look at the website as well. Some of these questions that are being asked are very detail oriented questions, and I think a lot of your answers may be able to come from some of those documents that are already posted onto our website. Going back to noise real quick, Rick, and while I was scrolling through some of the questions, I might have missed this in your explanation. But I think a lot of folks have concerns with those single event noise levels. Can you can you just go into just a little bit of detail? I know you spoke about the 65 DNL level. That's what FAA usually looks at compatibility issues, but I think a lot of the concerns come from those single event thresholds, those single events such as a JetBlue or a corporate flight coming in or out.
Yeah, that's very common. I mean, we see those single events. I think we've all been at an airport when you think a fighter jet is taking off and come to find out that it's an old business jet. And those types of aircraft actually are the very ones that the FAA is banning as those stage 2 and stage 3 aircraft come out of the fleet. So that those single event numbers are definitely going to be high, and they're definitely going to be disturbing. However, we do have to use the day-night average on an annualized basis for this analysis. So we do show, and actually what's helpful is that the airport has what's known as a vector system that is used for operations. So it actually takes a picture of the aircraft when it goes to take off. So we had very, very detailed analysis in terms of what aircraft are using this airport, and also not only what type, but also when. That we were able to have a really good indication in terms of the day and nighttime aircraft that are using the airport. So in terms of what times and what type. So there's that. But the single event, unfortunately, from an FAA perspective, they want us to use the day-night average for these particular aircraft. And again, with 65 decibels being the threshold for any types of soundproofing or acquisition or insulation type program. So as of right now, the 65 noise contour does not leave airport property or can go over any residential property.
And just to clarify, there was a question about how old these noise contours are. These noise contours were created just this space in 2019. The brief that was the contour. These are 2019 operations. Was that this year?
These are, yeah, based on full year 2019 data. And once we have the preferred alternative selected with any changes to the landing or takeoff threshold, we will generate a future noise contour, which will show that plus the future activity. However, even though it's going to have a larger runway and slightly more operations, it's also going to account for a quieter aircraft because we'll be taking those larger general aviation aircraft out of the fleet and replacing them with the modern aircraft that are entering the fleet. So the noise contours would not likely be drastically different than what's shown here.
Thank you. We do have some questions regarding morning aircraft noise, especially at 5:30 in the morning, potentially for aircraft that are just getting ready to go in the morning or revving their engines prior to departure. So the airport has what we call a run-up pit, if you will. It's a depressed area on airport property that was installed so that aircraft who did need to test their engines, because we do have facilities here at the airport that are maintenance facilities. So those aircraft go into this area called a run up pit where they do run up their engines, test their engines. However, it's surrounded by an earthen berm, which does muffle the noise. As part of this master plan, we are looking at modifications to that where we can potentially look at a noise wall that would be put in, something similar. So we are looking at that, and hopefully that answers your question in regard to the morning noise. Um, there was a question regarding, why build here? Why continue with this airport here, and why expand this airport in this particular location, given the fact that it is hemmed in and surrounded by um, you know, that happens through the years. If you look at any airport within the United States, oftentimes the airport was put in a particular area that did not necessarily have a lot of growth around it, and then that growth grew up around the airport. That's similar to this airport as well as many other airports in the United States. If you look at the new Denver airport, I say the new Denver airport, it's quite old now. That was put out literally in the middle of nowhere, and the community grew up surrounded the airport. That's the same situation here at Cape Cod Gateway Airport. If you look at old photographs back in the 1920s when the airport it was initiated, it had grass landing strips that soon were paved into three usable runways. We're now down to two runways, but they were paved into three usable runways. They were used by the military for training purposes, and then the airport itself was given to the town of Barnstable. And as the years went by, the town of Barnstable and surrounding areas grew, and the community grew. And the airport has been here for quite some time, but the community grew around it. The same thing is true for Boston Logan, Providence Airport. If you look at some old pictures, you can see the growth that grows around that area. And if you think about it, it's growth around an economic center. So it's not growth just for the sake of the airport being here. It's growth because Barnstable, and in this particular area, is the economic center of Cape Cod. And as you can imagine, growth has happened significantly in this region because of that being the so that's one of the reasons why the airport um, uh, is here and the community has grown around the airport. Okay, let me see if we have some other questions here that have come in. Give us a second here. One of the questions came in about the future needs of the community. Can they be met without the addition of a runway extension? We're really meeting the requirements of not only the community that surrounds the airport, but also the aviation community that use this airport. So for as many comments that come in about the surrounding residential community, there's also a lot of comments that we are receiving about the aviation community and what is being developed at the airport to support that. And that's why we really have to look at a balanced approach. When Rick went over the preliminary recommended alternative for the airport, if you could bring that slide up again, Rick or Laura.
Sorry, which slide?
The preliminary, the one just above this, I
Yeah,
believe.
yeah.
So when we looked at our preliminary recommended alternatives, we're looking at obviously the runway extension that we talked about to accommodate really the existing aircraft that are using the facility. We're also looking at that same growth to be able to respond to community needs for those that wish to depart and fly into or fly out of this region without having a need to go to Providence often. We've had a lot of comments that have come through the email that we provided earlier in the slide that are very much proponents for the airport itself just for that reason. There's a lot of businesses on the Cape where their staff, they want to live on the Cape and they want to work on the Cape. And in order to do that and do it successfully, there are elements that need to be provided to those folks that allow for the ease of transportation to and from this region, without having a need to drive all the way up to Boston, drive to Providence to catch a flight. So it really is a balancing act for the airport and for the community to take a hard look at what's needed for the community on a whole, and then to also take into account those concerns that the community have in regards to noise or expansion of the airport. What we're really looking at is a proposed alternative that satisfies the need of a lot of these existing aircraft that are already used in the facility, as well as to respond to the aviation needs that have been brought to our attention for the businesses that are in this area. So we're really trying to balance the point here, satisfying both aviation and the. So hopefully that answers your question. Um,
Katie, I was going to jump in a couple of things there. When we did the analysis for the corporate aviation aircraft, some things there that talk about, again, meeting the future facility needs is that traditionally a lot of those corporate aircraft came in the summertime. And we're seeing, again, as the Cape evolves for that live and work community, that year-round community, again, these jets are using the aircraft in the wintertime when you do need to account for runways that may have snow or ice on them. And even this year, we did a 2-week sampling to figure out what is the appropriate stage length to do the analysis for general aviation aircraft. Because the FAA, the FAA standard analysis, they want us to use maximum takeoff weight. We knew that was not a reasonable approach for this airport, so we actually did it for a Hyannis adjusted stage length. So we're not assuming everything being at max takeoff weight. That's not reasonable. We have aircraft that can go to Europe and such. However, there are a lot of aircraft that every day leave Hyannis. They're not going to just New York. They're going to Florida. They're going to Dallas, Texas. They're going to Bozeman, Montana. These are some of the cities that we saw. They are still traveling 1,000 to 2,000 miles away from the Cape every day with these corporate aircraft. So that is one of the factors we had to consider, is that there is business being done here that people may not realize.
Thank you, Rick. And I do want to get back to one of the question that just came up. I think I answered the question partially, excuse me. The question came in about looking at an alternative location for the airport rather than around the populated center of Hyannis. A lot of times during the environmental analysis, which I'll reiterate this again, the master plan will be completed, but then the next step is to go into environmental review and an analysis that will look at local impact. We will follow the federal NEPA requirements and looking at any of these proposed recommendations, but we'll also work with Cape Cod Commission and with the NEPA office in Massachusetts. So one of the, as part of the alternatives discussion, that I'm not saying it is, but that may be one alternative that is analyzed as part of the overall EA. That has been done at other airports. When they go through the environmental process, as part of the screening, they may look at what alternatives they have for development at or around the airport, what are the options that they have, and they will look at that, but they also take into account the cost of doing that, as well as the infrastructure that has been added to this particular site. They'll take a look at that as well. But typically, the environmental review will look at that as part of a screening alternative. I'm not saying it's definitely that typical of environment. I hope that answers the question.
So we have a question here. Are pilots getting any training to staff and the approach to do it quite well, a model aircraft? I wanted to give a perspective on an aircraft flying, because I think in some cases, generally speaking, aircraft want to come in and they'll have pretty low because of altitude, keep up their airspeed enough. What you might hear is that certain aircraft the day or how they're flying might come in and realize that they're approaching the ground faster than they should, have accelerate and put extra power into their engine to get back to that perfect elevation, perfect glide level to get down to the runway. So pilots in general don't get specific training often in approach. Generally speaking, will be slower um, and than during cruise flight, and definitely than during takeoff when they're coming into blend. But there are definitely instances where if the winds are strong and you're being blown off course, or you have your engine a little bit too low and you're coming in lower than you should be, that pilot needs to throttle up their engine on approach. So it's a really case.
Or if
Thank
you're a
you.
rusty pilot like me.
Right? Yeah, I'd have to have some practice too.
Thank you, Laura. I wanted to answer a couple of questions that are regarding to aircraft that come to Cape Cod Gateway Airport, perhaps from Nantucket, drop off passengers and come to Nantucket. And yes, thank you for that question. That does happen. Oftentimes, Nantucket, especially in the summer months, might not have ample space for parking of aircraft, so they will drop their passengers off in Nantucket. The aircraft will come over to Cape Cod Gateway Airport, and they'll park here for the weekend, and then return over to Nantucket to pick up their passengers. So that does happen. As well as there was one other question in regard to do private aircraft come to the islands from the islands to purchase fuel from the airport. And, that does happen. Oftentimes, it really depends on what that cost of fuel is. Oftentimes, if they're dropping passengers off here, they'll drop them off here at the airport, refuel, and then go on their merry way to their next flight or their next destination. Sometimes pilots will look at the cost of fuel at this airport as well as some of the island airports, make a decision as to where they're going to purchase. So it really depends on the pilot's preference and where their passengers need to be, and how much time that they have for those. Let me see some of the other questions here. There's one question about whether or not the airport commission can discuss with Cape Air and private jets the need to stay within the recommended approach departure patterns. That does occur on a regular basis. Oftentimes, we will, our own staff will see something occur, or we'll monitor flights that occur in and out of the airport, or we'll get a call from the community stating that there is a flight that seems to have gone out of the flight path. We will reach out to Cape Air and to other jets that utilize the facility right away. Our noise abatement officer will chat with them about making sure that they're using the recommended approach departure patterns. Of course, if there's a situation where they can't do that because the tower has directed them in a different location to avoid other traffic coming in, obviously those changes need to be made as the pilot's flying. But they do make every effort, and I know personally from dealing with Cape Air and with other tenants on the field, they as soon as we bring it to their attention, they make adjustments, and they're very good in working with us. They're very good at working with any concerns that we have. So we do our best to handle that. There's a question here about jets and helicopters in the area. We're seeing more jets and helicopters in the area, and that purchase fuel from the airport, and that is correct. When COVID-19, when the pandemic started, um, obviously we saw a significant decline in commercial traffic, but we saw an increase in traffic as it relates to private jets, corporate jets utilizing the facility. As you can imagine, the pandemic hit. There were a lot of people that were coming in from New York, Jersey that have summer homes in this area. They had the ability to work from home. We saw a lot of those private jets coming in, dropping off passengers, and then returning at the end of the weekend. So we did see an increase in traffic because of COVID-19 as relate to private or I'm just scrolling through. I don't know, Laura, and as I'm scrolling through these, Laura and Rick, are there anything that you can pick up on those? Just trying to read through some of these comments. Um,
Question about the total number of takeoffs and landings in a 24-hour period. And actually, if you go into the forecast video and forecast chapter, um, what's unique about Hyannis is that there is a seasonal factor to it. So we didn't want to actually look at everything on an annual basis. But if you do get into some of the peaking characteristics of the summertime, but according to the current statistics, the average is about 179 operations per day. So divide that number by two, so you have about 90-ish takeoffs per day on average. And so using the peaking factor, that could probably be over 100 in the summertime, and it could be below 50 on a Tuesday in January. But again, as the airport becomes more of a year-round community, you may see those spike decline. So in the summertime, when your windows are open and you are seeing over 100 takeoffs per day, if the airport is evolving to more of that year-round community that we're talking about and getting that year-round business user to use the airport, it may balance out more and those aircraft using more when your windows are closed in the wintertime.
let me try answering one more question, and I think we can move on because it's 7:30 now, when we kind of had this allotted for about an hour and a half. There is one question about, well, multiple questions about capping future commercial aircraft that come into the airport and capping the number of operations that use the facility. And the answer is no, the airport cannot cap future commercial planes coming into the facility, nor can we cap the number of operations that occur within a given day. This is a public use airport. The FAA established it as a public use airport. It means that it is open to the public and the aviation community 24/7. So we cannot cap commercial activity or cap operations that are utilized at this airport because it is available to them as a public use facility. So hopefully that answers the question. Rick, why don't we take it to the next step and we can wrap up any questions that have not been answered, or if they just are questions that we need a little bit more time to respond to you quicker than, just giving you a live answer right now. We will be adding all of the questions that we received tonight plus the answers in a frequently asked questions document that will be available on our website. So you will be able to get any of those questions that were not answered at tonight's meeting. We will do our best to include them on our website as soon as possible. So let's talk a little bit about next steps. We went through a lot of information tonight. If you can go to the next slide, please. So I just want to reiterate where we are, what we're doing, and when is the next time the public will have opportunity to comment and provide feedback. So, the master plan itself, um, we've been working with a number of stakeholders that include um, uh, from stakeholders from the town of Barnstable, from businesses that surround in the community, from the town of Yarmouth. We've had selectmen that have been part of the process. We also have civic associations that have been part of the process. So the FAA as well has been part of the process. They will comment on these facility requirements and alternatives that we've presented here. Um, we'll take our public comments that we received tonight. We'll look at those comments that came in, make sure that we can respond to your comments. And then at the end of the day, we will have a recommended alternative that will be included in the airport layout plan and approved by the Federal Aviation Administration. Now, the implementation plan that you see there, the implementation, what that means is not putting a shovel in the ground, not developing the recommended alternative at this point. The implementation plan is to look at that recommended alternative and to come up with an analysis of what it would cost and how it would be implemented if we were to proceed forward in that. So it's not implementation as in we start construction. It's how will we begin to look at construction if we do go towards this recommended alternative. That's what implementation. We will also be having another stakeholder meeting. The PAG is the Planning Advisory Group. Like I said, it's made up of between 45 and 50 representatives that surround Yarmouth, the town of Barnstable, and our civic associations, as well as the Cape Cod Commission, our town council from Barnstable, members of town council, members of the airport commission. That's what makes up our planning advisory. All of those planning advisory group meetings have been recorded and are available right now on our website, but we will have one last planning advisory group meeting on in May of 20. The FAA airport layout plan, after the implementation is completed, the FAA will approve the airport layout plan, approve the recommended alternative that is the outcome of this process. And then we step into the environmental analysis review. So we had a lot of questions that came up tonight about kind of what are the next steps, where do we go from here? So really the environmental process will look at those alternatives. They'll look at the recommended alternatives and further screen those alternatives against National Environmental Policy Act regulations. So it will look at noise, it will look at community impact, it will look at air quality, it will look at wetland and natural resource impact. So it will take that recommended alternative and further screen those alternatives and look at it from an environmental process. So that's anywhere from a 12-month to 18-month process, and we hope to begin that process in the fall or winter of this. So the public will have ample time to respond yet again to the recommended alternatives as part of the overall environmental process. There was one question that came in about who, how is the consulting firm selected for that process? And we have put out a request for proposals for environmental firms to respond to that proposal, and they will go through a public selection process to be able to implement the environmental process for the airport. So right now, the RFP, as we call it, is out on the street, and we're asking for proposals to come in. Next slide. And here are the project contacts. If you have questions for us, you know, please feel free to reach out. Also, please utilize if you can bring up, Laura, the email address for questions. So if there's something that you thought of, thank you, right there. If there's something that you thought of or you're thinking of after the fact, after this meeting, please feel free to use that email address that's right there on your screen to get back to us. We also have listed that on our website. Again, if you can scroll back to the beginning, Laura, where it shows how to get into our website, I just want to make sure people have access to that. Thank you. So again, go to the Town of Barnstable's website. Under departments, you will find Cape Cod Gateway Airport. And then once you open Cape Cod Gateway Airport, at the very top of the screen, there's a button that says Airport Master Plan. Click for details. And that's where all of the information will be for all of the reports that have been completed thus far, as well as any meetings that we've had with our planning advisory group and the virtual voiceover presentations that we provided back in October. Those are also available. And I think that's all we have for this evening. So I wanted to thank everyone for your time. Thank you for all of your questions that came in. And like I said, any questions that have come up, we will respond through our frequently asked questions and add them to our website as soon as possible. With that, I would like to thank you all and have a pleasant evening. And please tune back to our website for more information. Rick, Laura, any comments?
No, and there were no emails that came in. I just checked and there were no emails that came in during the meeting as well for questions for people using that option.
Okay,
But
great.
thank you everybody for coming, and we appreciate the feedback very much because this is the whole process. Thank you everybody for coming out, and all the comments you provided will be answered lot of your questions. A wonderful evening.
Laura, we've had a couple of questions that asked for the contacts again, so can you bring
Sure.
that?
I see in the attendee list several emails that match up with our inbox. So we are definitely reading and taking a look, and we read through each of the comments that we were.
Yeah, the easiest email to go is to the masterplan@mjinc.com. That's the one where we have all emails for this particular airport master plan together, which will make it easy.
Okay. Thank you all. Have a pleasant evening.